live. And I'm frozen.
Maybe. I don't see the live yet. And here
Oh,
we
there you
are.
go.
Ooh.
Yes. Hello.
So,
Okay.
It appears live to me.
Ready?
and I'm buggy, so go ahead, Gilles, and you can introduce.
Okay. Then welcome everyone to the first live question and answer session from the Godot developers. Let me introduce myself. I'm Gilles Roudiat, or also known as Giroud on GitHub. So I will be your host for tonight, and I moderate the discussion, ask developers we have here. Well, ask them the question we have. So first of all, let's do a quick presentation of everyone here. Let's go from left to right, top to bottom, if the order is the same on the live stream. So Fabio, maybe?
Okay, I think the order is not the same because I have a different order, but okay. So my name is Fabio. It's all right. My name is Fabio Alessandrelli. You probably know me as Fales on IRC and Fales with 2S on GitHub. I've been following Godot for some years now. This is the teacher from the first GodotCon 2017, I think, was it? And then I'm the maintainer of the networking part, and recently about the HTML5 export. So that's it for me. I don't want to take too much time. So who's next, the moderator?
George, on my side.
Oh, so I'm George. I also know of Vinen in the ERC and GitHub and social networks. I contribute to Godot since 2015, and now I'm responsible for GDScript and for GDNative that I took recently, and also for the UWP port. I guess that's it.
Okay, Juan?
Hi, I'm Juan. I'm I could say like development lead. I'm one of the original Godot authors together with Ariel. And I'm trying to make sure things continue working nicely for now, but it's difficult.
And last but not least, Remy.
Hi, I'm Remy. I hope I'm not frozen. I don't have the best Wi-Fi connection here, but you may know me as Akian on different social networks. I'm the project manager for Godot, so basically everything which Ran is not doing, I might be partly in charge of that. So handling all the contributions from all the contributors and the different community platforms, the website, the communication, and so on.
Okay, thanks. So,
and Gilles, who are you?
Yeah, well, I'm one of the contributors in 2017, I think. I've worked mainly on the 2D editor and 2D things in general. And yes, tonight I'll be the one to asking you a question. That's mainly why I'm here, because all of those are, all of them are paid by the Godot organization, directly or indirectly. I mean, in general. So yes, for this session, we're going to have a stream which is supposed to be 1 hour long. So we're going to go first on question, which were asked by our Patreons, the higher tiers Patreon. So we're going to pick one question or eventually a little bit more for each Patreon. So yes, obviously this is the first time we do that kind of thing, so forgive if there is any technical difficulties that can happen. So let's dive into it. So the first question we have is targeted to Juan. It's a question by Jasper, and the question was, how is Vulkan coming along? And what are the key differences in the workflow with 3.2? So what's going to change with Vulkan in general?
Okay. So the main difference between Vulkan and the previous one, which is OpenGL, is that Vulkan is a more modern API. It's designed for higher performance. It has more industry adoption. Usually, one of the problems we have with OpenGL is that we would hit problems with the drivers or things that were not exactly clear how they worked, affecting performance or other areas. With Vulkan, it's easier because it's a simpler API in a sense. You access almost directly to the driver. This allows you to optimize better, to have better performance. Some things will going to change. Mainly on the workflow, it's going to remain more or less the same. You will see the same as in Godot 3, but it will just have like higher quality effects, higher quality rendering, more performance in general. You're going to have quite more features for rendering that are going to look pretty nice, like from global illumination is going to work much better. You're going to have a lot of nice things that will put Godot in a more modern perspective compared to other game engines, maybe. Workflow-wise, I think the main difference is that in Godot 3, you would set some options, like, for example, the texture filter or the texture repeat and the texture itself. This is different in Godot 4. You have to do it on the material or in the shader. This has been quite requested a few times, but now we do it because it helps like render with more performance, because this is more the way the APIs work, and because it allows to have more textures per material. And it's just better in general. So even if you're making pixel art, simple games, you will be able to switch like a simple option from the project settings to change the filter and make it like nearest. So in general, I think it's going to be pretty nice. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the main difference. It will look better, will look faster, it will have more features, it will be shinier. That's how it takes.
So, okay, globally, like in the way you interact with the rendering part, you probably won't have a lot of difference compared to 3.2. The question we could ask ourselves eventually in the visual server, would you have a lot of changes there? Because I guess most of the nodes won't change their API, but the visual server, I guess, might. Which is for those who don't know what it is basically the low-level API for rendering in Godot. So
yeah, basically in Godot 3, we just wrote OpenGL directly behind the rendering server. In Godot 4, we have an extra layer in the middle, which is called rendering server. The rendering device. Rendering device is a low-level rendering API. Right now, it's implemented using Vulkan, but the idea is that you can eventually implement using like WebGPU, Metal on Apple devices, DirectX 12 or Windows. So it's something easier to abstract. For the companies porting to console, it's important because porting OpenGL like to PlayStation is super difficult, but porting rendering device is very easy. So the companies porting to console are going to have an easier job doing this. So also, if you want to override parts of the rendering, like you want to make your own post-processing effects or your rendering code, having access to rendering device, which is something that didn't happen, you didn't have it before. Having access to that will allow you to like write lower level code and share it with others on the asset library. So that also is a big nice advantage on the new renderer.
okay. Just before I see a question in the chat, we will answer some question from the chat as soon as we're done with the Patreons. Since that going in the log. Okay, so following question regarding rendering. Do we know what the support will be for OpenGL ES 2 and ELES 3 in Godot 4? What's the plan there?
Okay, that one is complicated. We are still discussing this with the rendering contributors. Usually what we have now is in Godot 3, what happened is that we tried to use OpenGL ES 3 and use it as a high performance, like modern rendering API. We used all the features, all the advanced stuff as much as we could. And what we noticed with that is that, like, for example, for mobile devices, the performance is terrible. So most people making mobile games are using OpenGL ES 2 because 3 is kind of too complex for mobile. And at the time we made it also, there wasn't much compatibility with OpenGL ES 3. So What is going to happen in Godot 4 is that at this point, if you look at mobile, compatibility with OpenGL ES3 pretty much is universal, and especially by the time Godot 4 comes out, everything is going to support OpenGL ES3. So there's not a lot of reason to use OpenGL ES2 anymore. But the difference is that we're going to change the rendering for OpenGL ES3 as a lower end backend for rendering. This way, you're going to still get the same performance as you get now with OpenGL ES2 because it's going to be a simpler renderer, more aimed to mobile than what it is now. The idea is to keep OpenGL ES2 somehow, but a lot less supported, because just dropping ES2 allows us to make a much simpler rendering code. Because, like, for example, there's rendering features in ES3, like texture arrays or uniform buffer objects. There's a lot of stuff that is more modern from ES3 that if we can drop ES2 is going to be better. If we focus on ES3, we can also make HDR rendering, which is not possible now with ES2. So we will probably still maintain ES2 mainly for 2D if you want to make a 2D game. The main fear we have is that if you're exporting to web, the only API that actually works is WebGL 1, which is the same as OpenGL ES2. We'll see how this turns out, because there's WebGPU coming out like next year probably, and WebGL 2 works mostly everywhere except on the Safari browser, so we need to see how that pans out. So technically, our goal is to have mostly OpenGL ES3 as a back end to Vulkan for lower end devices and for both desktop and mobile. But if we need to keep supporting ES2, we will do it if it needs to be. I think contributors still want to support it, so eventually it's going to happen anyway. But it's not going to be like the priority of where we are working on. So that's it, I guess.
Okay. That's pretty clear. Okay, let's move on to another question. This one was supposed to be for George. It's asked by Moonward, and the question is, are there any plans for the GDNative workflow to be smoothed out and improved in 4.x?
Yeah, so I took the GDNative part for myself quite recently, and somehow I still hadn't have enough time to like dig through everything and understand how it works under the hood. So we do have plans to improve the workflow. The problem is just I particularly don't know exactly what are the problems. So I asked for people who are using GDNative to open issues, maybe, or proposals, or talk to me and like tell what's missing from GDNative that and what could be added that would improve your workflow. And we had some ideas, like have a ready-made scones template, so you can just use that for compile the code without having to create your own system to compile everything. Like you just download and start working. And that's one thing that we planned, but I'm sure there's a lot of other small details that we still need to flesh out. So if you have an idea of what needs to be done, like talk to me. And yes, like there are plans, I just don't know what are the plans. So I guess that's the answer.
Okay. So it's probably not going to be for 4.0, but I guess like for 4.1, 4.2, we could maybe have some, if not like drastic changes to the way GDNative works, but eventually having templates and things like, it's something we would like to work on, I guess, to sum things up. So, okay, thanks. Next question. Okay, I think, physics for Juan. What are the plans for physics in 4.0 and 4.1, eventually including compute physics supports, like physics? And it's asked by Albinask and Moonwards.
Okay, so physics is quite a problem. It's very funny because like over years we've been focusing on different things as a main complaint from the community. Like currently rendering was the main complaint that community wanted to improve. So now it's getting there. And the next item is physics that really needs improvement. So the thing with physics is that Godot uses a custom physics engines that I wrote like more than 10 years ago. They were okay at the time. I think they are a bit old now. They probably need improving. At some point, we moved to Bullet, as we added Bullet as an option for physics and made it default because it's more mature. It supports like soft bodies and a lot of nice things. The problem is that it's still complicated to make something that works like nicely with Godot, because, for example, I will give you a very simple example. When you use the move and slide for making your characters, this uses a very custom logic, so it works to you. It works very easy. You just put move and slide and it works. But the logic behind is really complicated to make it easy to use. We never managed to get bullets to work very nicely with that as an example, because the collision system is a bit different. Doesn't work exactly the same as the other physics engines. So my personal goal, of course, this needs to be discussed with other contributors. I would like to fix eventually the Godot physics, both for 2D and 3D. It needs to be modernized because it never happened. But I understand that a lot of people still want to use like more established physics engines, because if you're going to for raw performance, you're going to, like, for example, PhysX is much better than anything else. So one of the ideas that, of course, we will need to work with George with that is that I want to make physics engines pluggable. So if you want to use a separate physics engine for your game, you just can do it. This can be done with GDNative rather easily, especially because the physics server is very like self-contained. So it should be easy to do that. So I think the plans for physics, probably, if everything goes well, is that we're going to have like the built-in engines, which are very simple, work as fast as possible, and then provide everything else via GDNative if you want something for specific use cases. For GPU compute, I want to see about supporting that eventually. I think I have enough experience with compute at this point to give it a try. Also, compute is mature enough for this, finally. But to be honest, we need to get everything else working first. So that probably won't be for Godot, maybe 4.1 or 4.2. It's not like super priority, but it's something that we want to get done eventually. Would be pretty nice. You have to understand that we don't really use compute by default for physics like GPU, because it just takes work away from the rendering. Like the GPU can do physics. It's not super efficient. It's very efficient, but it doesn't like make the best use of the GPU. So if you use it by default, you're going to be wasting GPU that you can use for rendering. So yeah, it's in the plans. I think maybe a year or two from now it's going to be there, I hope. But it's not like high priority right now. I think it's higher priority that we can make physics engines pluggable, both for 2D and 3D, so you can use whatever works best for your game.
Makes sense.
I can maybe mention something for the chat. So we're going to take questions from the chat, but there's a lot of them. So we are trying to list some of the relevant ones, and we will answer some of them as we go along. Yeah. And there's one, maybe, sorry, Gilles, if I take over temporarily.
No problem.
There's one which is, I think, for all of us. How do you pronounce Godot? So I gave you one hint. I think everyone can give their own pronunciation, and
I say Godot. And well, I know Juan says Godot, and like even
I'm a Spanish speaker, so to me it's Godot. I think for every one of us, we are different language speakers, like natives. So I wonder for George what it sounds like.
It's like Godot.
Oh, it's even different. I mean, we're waiting for Godot or Godot, and we're also waiting for the real pronunciation, I guess.
And for Fabio, I guess it's Godot.
Let's see.
So
anyway, let's continue with the next. Yes, with the hand. All right. Next question. Speaking of Fabio, it's for you. What are the plans for networking and higher level entity replication? Asked by Alejandro.
Okay, so that there's been a lot of discussion recently and even more historically about scene replication, node replications, and the like. I'll try to keep my hand still, although it's hard. So I Currently, I'm busy basically with the HTML5 part work I've been doing. But there is definitely the work of Odinos about synchronization that is interesting. It's something we've been looking at. There's probably, it's not perfect. There's probably something to change, but we definitely plan to have something for easier the goal of synchronizing network peers. And we also discussed some time ago, and I hope it's going to be what we'll be what I'll be focusing on probably since October, the end of October, when most of my work on HTML5 should be done, besides maintaining. Is some form of scene replication. So the original idea was to make replication on a scene level instead of a node level, because most of the time you want to replicate a bunch of nodes together. And that way you can avoid basically easily avoid like sending scripts to other peers. But I still need to write a proposal on that, proper proposal on that, and it's something we've been planning and we discussed even in our last meeting. So it's probably gonna come up in the next few weeks, a proper proposal about a way to synchronize, especially like replicate nodes, and more specifically, I think it's gonna be scene based. So you can have your scene and you can mark that as in a way to be replicated, and then when you instantiate it and add it to the tree, if it's in a multiplayer, like in a network enabled game, it will try to send the spawn event, let's say, the other, and replicate and instantiate the scene there. So that's more or less the plan, but it's not, again, it's not formalized yet, but I plan to formalize it soon. And of course, we really want to hear the opinion about it from the community. So we'll see how the discussion goes. But it's probably something, if I have to say, probably something more for 4.1 than for 4.0, because I don't think there's enough time to make something that is stable enough.
Yes, there is a high demand for that kind of thing. Apparently, we kind of have several pull requests about things like that. Yeah, I think people are expecting that someday. But well, let's hope it's going to be able to be done for 4.x. Let's see. Okay. The next questions are for George and are about GDScript. I grouped them together because they are quite related. First one is, from Kyle, could we get an update on await versus yield in GDScript?
Well, the thing is that yield was a bit complicated to understand. A lot of people didn't understand. Like, took a lot of time to understand how it works. And one of the problems is the word, that it means something different in other languages. So I decided to change to await and change the behavior a little bit. So maybe I can try to share just a little bit of. Can you see? Oh, can you like show my screen big? So just a little small bit of code. It uses the await syntax, how it's supposed to be, and this code actually works. I tested it; it works on the. So the idea is to have this, like, you can await directly for a signal. So you have a get node button, and then you have like the button now signal. You don't need to use strings anymore for this. So that's one big plus. And the other thing is for the coroutine. So you can await for a function call, and it's gonna like execute this call, which is right in here. It's gonna wait for the button down and gonna return this after the button is pressed. So after the button is pressed, it's gonna come back here and set the text to whatever you returned here. So the things now, it's much easier to understand. Okay, I'm waiting for this thing to go on, and this thing is waiting for the button to be pressed, and after that, it's going to return that. So you can kind of understand how the flow works with this little piece of code right here. And that's pretty much it. The only things that before you can have a yield without any parameters and just get the state back, and now you don't have this. And I'm thinking of something to replace this behavior, but I think most of uses for a yield, for what I could gather, is that people are using for waiting for signals. So this like is much easier to do now, and is also type safe, because if you do something wrong, it just the editor complains, oh, you're doing it wrong, you're getting a state when you shouldn't get a state. So,
Okay.
That's the main change.
Can you increase a little bit your font so that people can see? I'm not sure it's easy to do. Yes, okay, perfect, it works. So guys, you can have a look to the code and how clean and simple it looks compared to the yield version. Okay. So yes, that's great. Two other question on GDScript. Will GDScript will be getting any kind of reflection features asked by Moonwards, like in C#, for example? I see.
So reflection kind of mean different things depending of who you ask. So one thing is introspection, which is like, oh, I have an object, I want to know what class it is, what are the properties, what are the methods, and you can already pretty much do everything already of this in GDScript. You can check the method, if it has a method, the list of methods, or the list of properties. This is already one thing. The other thing of reflection is changing. Like I want to add a new property at the runtime, or I want to add a new method at runtime. And this I'm not sure is like super useful. You can make some crazy stuff this, but I don't think it's something that's needed. At least I don't see like any particular use case that's really useful to have, oh, I want to add a new method to this object at runtime. That you can do like easily in another way.
To be honest, in my experience with Python, I know like sometimes when you have a library, you wanna mock, for example, like having a fake library or a fake object. It's sometimes useful to override a function as this object. So, but I have to admit the use case is quite specific, and since in GDScript you don't have so many libraries yet, I agree the use case might be a little bit limited for now in the situation. So let's see, if some people like complain about it, we might have a look to the problem, I guess. Another question, will GDScript support conditional breakpoints by Moonwards?
Well, the short answer is yes. The long answer is yes, I don't know when. So I do want to improve a lot of the tooling behind GDScript, including the debugging experience and everything. And one thing is conditional breakpoints. I just don't know when I'm gonna start. Maybe not for 4.0, but definitely in the future releases.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Another question for Juan and rendering. We talked a little bit about that. Will 4.0 expose Vulkan Compute via a compute-only queue? Asked by Alejandro.
Yeah, right now, if you want to do compute on Godot 4.0, I think it's not entirely working right now, but on the API is all there anyway. What you can do is you can create native GLSL shaders. I mean, not using Godot shader language, but the actual GLSL. Godot 4 now lets you import those into SpearV, so you just can import your GLSL. It also supports like having versions of the shader. It's pretty nice, I think. So with that, you can use your own rendering device. You have rendering device, which is a low-level API for rendering, but you can create your own instance for it. So you don't exactly need a sync compute for this. You can just create your own device and use it as you like in the thread you like without much limitation. This will work in most modern hardware. Async compute, I think we didn't expose it yet, but it's probably not something to be, unless you're working on rendering code, and you want to compute something in the background, probably it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just easier to create your own rendering device and use it any way you like. So yeah, that's it.
I think we lost Gilles.
Yeah, I think he's down.
Well, I'll take over while he gets back online. I guess he was bored by the explanation about compute. It's too complex. Sorry, Juan. So what's next is, what did we have? I'm not sure what order we were in, but there's one for Juan, which I also saw in the chat, and it was also asked on Patreon by Vavin, which are, what are the plans for a terrain editor? That's a recurring question in the Godot world since the early days.
Okay, so it's kind of complicated to make a terrain editor because we have somebody new. Hi, Gilles, number 2.
Yeah, sorry for that.
We have clones here. So the idea with terrain editor is that we want to make one eventually. We are not exactly sure what or how. The problem is that there's so many ways to do a terrain editor that making one that works for everybody is not easy. So actually, we talk a lot with Zilan, who makes the terrain editor in GDScript. From what I discussed with him in the past, the idea would be eventually to port his work to master branch and make it C++ integrated with the editor. But on the meantime, we are learning exactly what actually you like from a terrain editor, how to make it, how to make the best UI. I think eventually it's going to be there. So what you will see probably something very similar to what Zilan has been making in his plugin, but just ported natively. I think some things are going to be probably better because you're going to be able to use texture arrays for having as many materials as you want for your terrain. Another nice thing is that I really want to explore the progressive, how is it called? The transvoxel terrains. So you can just have something other than hate fields. But yeah, eventually the idea is that it's going to be a native one once we figure out exactly what the best way to do it is and how to expose it best to users. But that's about it.
Okay, so we were at question 11, I guess.
We were on the terrain editor.
Okay, so 12. Next is a question for Remy. Where can the community help more others than with programming? Asked by Retro Village.
All right, so there's a lot of things that people can contribute to aside from like hardcore development on the engine. We have a page in the documentation, which like...
Do you want to share your screen maybe?
I can maybe try to share my screen, yes. So... Do you see my screen?
I'm not sure it's in full screen though.
How about now?
Maybe it is now. Okay,
so
okay, we can see it.
The Godot documentation, and you have a section when you scroll down, community contributing, and we have a nice write-up on the ways that you have to contribute to Godot, and then a lot of documentation for the different kind of contributions you can make. And it's summarized here, so I can just say a few words on the chat so that it's said out loud. But if you're interested, I suggest to read this to have all the details. But basically, to contribute to Godot, first thing, if you're part of the community, you use it.
So sorry to interrupt. I think you are no longer the moderator. I think the YouTube stream is not showing
okay.
the full screen. Screen.
Here.
Okay.
Better?
Yeah.
So now I'm full screen. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, you can go to the documentation here, contributing, ways to contribute. So using Godot, promoting it is the best of contributions because you can expand like the user base of Godot and then also the amount of contributors. Contributing code, but that was like not the focus right now. Testing and reporting issues, that's something that like we don't have any like paid quality assurance in Godot. So everything we do, it's based on like all the users reporting bugs and then testing if some old bug reports are still valid, or updating your own bug reports to check if they are still valid and still need like maybe some more debugging from yourself. And a big thing that you can do is contributing to the documentation. So we have two kinds of documentation. The class reference, which is the one you have in the editor, which describes like the properties of every single method and property of the Godot API. And then you can help write tutorials and like more like things like improving how to use specific 2D features, how to use, for example, I don't know, the tile map editor to use auto tiles, or how to internationalize a game using CSV. Maybe could have some more documentation. So that's something you can contribute to simply by, you can go to the documentation. Here you can click edit on GitHub and come to the Godot docs repository. And you can edit the pages directly there. So you can go to the page from the documentation, or you can see issues, you can help review pull requests, and so on. So if you're interested, you can just go on, for the documentation, you can go on the documentation channel on Discord and ask for guidance. And yeah, you can always ask me if you need some more guidance. And now we are going to a wall of mirrors, so I stopped sharing my screen.
Yes, thanks. And also for people, obviously, one of the best way to support the engine is to make games with it. So even if you don't contribute code or things like that, if you make games, you contribute a lot to like how well-known the engine is, and so it's also a great way to contribute. And
and that's one thing where, contrarily to other engines, we don't force a splash screen on you or things like that. But if you can remember to mention that you're using Godot in your credits, it's a great way to help promote the engine and say, hey, you like this game, then it was made with this engine. So it's a good way to raise awareness of nice games being made with it.
Makes me think we had a lot of games that implemented their own version of the logo. So that's something we like a lot, especially Juan, who likes it apparently. Mm-hmm. So because you told us it reminded you from the Sega area. Is that it?
Yeah, if you want to make your own version of the Godot logo, anything you want that distorts or modifies the Godot robot or logo or anything for your game, that's amazing. Just like your own personal Godot logo, just amazing.
Thanks. Okay, so apparently the next question is for me. It's by Alejandro, and he's asking if there is any roadmap for adding support for machine learning framework. So I'm answering this question because in my day job, I'm a data scientist. So regarding Godot, the main problem with machine learning is that it's really a bunch of techniques. You got really a lot of things you can do with machine learning, and in games, it's not really clear what are the obvious use cases for those techniques. So basically, considering that we do not know in advance what the technology would be used for in the engine, we kind of don't want to force people over using a specific library. Typically, you could think about TensorFlow or PyTorch, I think, which are libraries made for neural networks. But neural networks, when you know a little bit about them, they are really efficient in doing some things, but not that much in doing other things. So, well, probably this kind of machine learning framework is not going to be built in the engine. I mean, as in the core. So probably we will make things available so that like probably via GDNative. So it's simple to integrate that kind of libraries, but it's not planned to add a machine learning framework yet in the engine, unless we find a really good use case that everyone could benefit from it, and we would integrate it. But until now, it's not found yet. Do you want to add something to this, guys?
Yeah, I can just add that you should not have expectations that the engine would eventually have a "Make my AI great again" button that would create your AI using machine learning somehow magically. Like machine learning, it's techniques that you can use if you know how to use them as a data scientist. So we can make the libraries available, but how you use them to make actual game content, that will stay up to you, or whatever middleware that the community might develop and provide. There's already some who have started making some AI-focused frameworks that build on top of Godot. So those things could also then benefit maybe from some common data set for machine learning. But that's not something we really see as necessary in the core Godot engine.
Exactly. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. Asked by Kyle, would it be possible and in your view useful to be able to create a tween directly with a helper method, similar to how timers can be created with getTree.createTimer? I think we had some things about that. Isn't it something that don't we have a PR for that, George?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's something already done for that. And honestly, this is the first time I hear about this, so I have no idea what the plans are about this. I mean, it makes sense in one sense. It makes sense in one way, but
there's a pull request which was exposing some kind of like static way to interpolate values without like using Tween behind the scene. But I think we discussed on this pull request. I don't remember if it has been updated, but that it should just be exposed as a built-in function like interpolate, where you can choose the kind of interpolation method that you want. Just like we have right now linear interpolate, which lets you do linear interpolation. So we could have some generic interpolate method where you can interpolate between two values with a weight factor, and then the different kind of like Tween-like parameter that we can also use in Tween directly.
I think they also asked for a way to like have a sequence of tweens. Like you could say on this range, I want an interpolation between this value and this value, and then on this range, something like that. I think it was proposed either in a proposal or in a PR. I think so. That's something we discuss, I guess.
Yeah, that's something we should look into. Maybe if there are some proposals, we should look into them a bit more. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement on the Tween API. I think it was contributed maybe in 2014. Like some contributor came, made this is Tween. Juan merged it, and then it worked great. It was a great feature, but it was not really made using the real Godot way of implementing features. So it's kind of this kind of UFO that landed in Godot, and now it's quite useful. So users like to use it, but it would need someone who understands Godot very well to rethink a bit how this kind of feature is exposed and make something maybe more Godot-ic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Next question about the documentation. What are our current plans to improve the documentation further? Asked by Jasper.
So yeah, we have plans for the documentation. So it already got like, since it gets improved all the time, like we have a lot of contributors working on documentation, and especially even since the 3.2 release, we had a lot of improvements that have been made and merged back into the 3.2 branch. So if you use the 3.2 branch of the documentation now to use Godot 3.2, you will have the latest and greatest of what exists right now. So we just merged today a whole new section about optimization, like all key concepts on how you should optimize your game or how you should think about optimization. Like, do you want to optimize CPU-wise or GPU-wise and stuff like that. So that's a great resource which has just been added. And we have plans further. We are planning to hire GDQuest, who is quite well known in the community, to help us like audit the existing documentation and refactor it a bit to be a bit more like better organized. We have already done this kind of reorganization back in before Godot 3. And now for Godot 4, it's kind of time again to see what we've learned from how to make documentation a bit more user-friendly and easier to grok. So GDQuest is going to work on that in the coming month. And then we're going to make sure that it's very easy to understand, like if you're a beginner or if you're an experienced developer, where to start and how to get to the most important information for you to understand how to use Godot, how Godot works, and then find the exact specific tutorial or feature explanation that you need.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good thing. We're going to see a lot of improvement in the documentation. It was something where we had complaints before, and to be honest, right now I have the feeling that there are a lot less than before. So indeed, was an improvement there, and if we can continue that, it would be awesome. Next question, and the last one, our selection. That's for Remy too. What is the support for 3.x going to be like in the future?
Right. So in the chat, some asking if like 3.2.3 would be the last release in 3.2. So
by
basically,
it's
basically going to be as it has been for previous releases. Basically, in Godot, we support our branches as long as they have a lot of users. So as long as people are using 3.2 to develop and publish or update their published games, we're going to keep supporting it. So right now it receives a lot of support because like 95% of users are on Godot 3.2. So it's kind of the support focus. So we are going to keep improving it until Godot 4 is released and probably a bit beyond, because we know that many of you are going to publish games with Godot 3.2, and you don't want to like have the support just stop. Like the kind of support that we tend towards eventually, it's more like we fix critical bugs and we fix changes necessary for platform support. So for example, if Google Play has new requirements of one kind of features that you should have, then we are going to update the branch and make new releases so that you can update your Android games, and the same for all other platforms. So you can be pretty safe using the 3.2 branch that it's probably going to receive updates for at least a full year more, and probably more than that. I think it's going to be pretty much, I mean, so far, since Godot, we started like supporting branches since Godot 2.0. And I think we've always supported branches more than 1 year and often more than 2 years. So a lot more than the current Unity LTS, which is supported for 2 years. That's like the base for Godot.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of improvements we do to the 3.x branches?
Right.
The way we manage that, what kind of either new features we could have in 3.x?
Right. So 3.2 is a bit in a tricky situation because on the master branch, we're developing Godot 4, and we know it's going to take a long time, and we're going to change a lot of things, break compatibility a lot, and we want the focus of development to be on that. So we don't want to have like a parallel development branch where we split kind of our focus. But at the same time, there are still a lot of interesting features that can be added to 3.2 and that are quite necessary to make it really like mature and usable for everyone. So for example, in Godot 3.2.2, we added support for iOS for C# and support for debugging C# project with Visual Studio Code. And the next release, 3.2.3, had support for debugging C# with Visual Studio community or like the main thing. So we go on a case-by-case basis. The focus is bug fixing, but sometimes some new features might be implemented both in the master branch and in the 3.2 branch so that we can also provide them to users of the stable branch. But it's still called stable branch, so our focus is on stability. With 3.2.2, we had a lot of new features that created instability. There are actually a few nasty regressions in 3.2.2, so that's why I'm hurrying up to make the new 3.2.3 that really will just fix the regressions that have been found in the past few weeks.
Okay, thanks. So we're done with the question from the Patreon. So we can move on to question from the chat. So I kind of selected some question I've seen in the chat before. Sorry, I couldn't read all of them. IndieDev is asking, could we expect Blender shortcuts in Godot in the 3D view? Do you want to... Yeah, the problem is like we don't know who to ask a question now.
Joan.
Yeah, Joan is the maintainer of the 3D editor. He's not here in this call, but we can ask him to come invited the next time. So he can talk about more of the plans about the 3D editor. There's a lot of nice things he's working on. Okay. Regarding to Blender shortcuts, I think it's mostly Blender-ish right now. But the idea is to make something that kind of is agnostic and general. Blender is quite unique in the way it works. So it's difficult. If you don't make the whole engine work like Blender, it's going to be difficult to do that. But it should be possible with plugins. And if there is enough demand for that, we can just expose Inog to make it possible to do it with add-ons that you just can't get from the asset library. If in many cases, I just say this in general, in many cases you may want a feature that we're not going to add because there's not a lot of demand. But what we can add is hooks or expose something in the editor API for plugins for you to implement that feature. So if you see that you request a feature, like for example, we have the proposal system. If you request something, a proposal, and it gets rejected, I suggest instead trying to see if we can suggest something for the editor API so you can implement that feature yourself or maybe somebody else. So it can be put on the asset library. If some feature for some reason proves to be super popular on the asset library, then there's no reason to make that feature available in the main editor. Because after all, the idea is that we trust to make something that works for most people's needs, and then leave the plugins for those who have corner cases. But that's kind of the idea.
Just to mention, recently we had an issue or a proposal about this specific point on Blender shortcuts. And I think the person who made the issue implement a lot of those shortcuts. So basically, when I think about, I think it was talking about like when you hit G, then X to lock on the X-axis, and X twice to lock on the local X-axis, that kind of thing. And I think he already implemented that, but I haven't seen any PR yet, pull request yet. So let's see if it happens. So that might be something we could discuss. on the PR. I have two questions regarding Android. A question: how will Vulkan performance will be on Android? Do you guys know?
I guess I can answer that too. So Vulkan will still be a high-end renderer for Android. You will require a relatively modern phone to use it. There are phones that are very low-end that will still not have fantastic performance with Vulkan, mostly because the way you do things with Vulkan is just more complex and more meant for more capable hardware. So I think the difference that you will see is that the OpenGL ES3 renderer is going to have pretty good quality, and if you're going to make something relatively simple and you don't care about high-end fonts, that's going to still be better than using Vulkan on mobile. But if you want to make something that looks amazing on mobile, yeah, that's definitely something that you're going to be using Vulkan for. Like, for example, for VR, Vulkan is going to be great for VR, for mobile VR, like the Oculus Quest and these kind of things. If you're going to make a really high-end 3D for mobile, Vulkan is going to look amazing. If you're going to make something simple, probably better to go with the ES3 renderer. It's kind of similar to the way we have right now with ES3 and ES2 in Godot 3. I think it's not going to change much, except ES3 is going to be much faster than what it is now in Godot 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I can maybe add to that, just for people to understand that when we talk about OpenGL ES3, it's not just like we switch a toggle and then it means that it will perform this good or this bad. Like the OpenGL ES3 renderer in Godot 3.2, it was kind of like a high-end renderer, so it was designed for having the best quality possible, which means that it pushes the most, like it tries to get the most out of the hardware. And then some drivers, especially on Android, would just like explode and say, no, that's too much for me, so I crash. So that's why for Godot 3.2, we, instead of trying to downgrade this usage, we did the OpenGL ES2 renderer, which is a lot more like safe. So the plan for Godot 4 is that the OpenGL ES3 renderer will be a safe one, so it will use those drivers, but it will not abuse them. It will try to stay on something which is safe for most hardware. So it should not be crashing, even if it was crashing now on Godot 3.2.
Yeah, it's very difficult to talk about performance in general because one may think that like Vulkan is fast or OpenGL is slow. But actually, when you do performance on game development, it's usually more about trade-offs. Like you can make something that is faster, but you sacrifice something else, or you can make something that looks amazing, but it's slower. So it's always something called trade-offs. Right now, in Godot 3.2, the ES3 renderer, the trade-off is that it looks really good. You can do a lot of stuff with it, but it's not super fast on older devices. You can, for example, put a lot of lights and it's going to look nice. The ES2 render, if you put 8 lights, it's going to be slower than the ES3 renderer. But if you put like 1 light, it's going to be faster. So it's different trade-offs, different ways of scale. So this is why the low-end render is good for stuff that you don't need to be too complicated. But if you want to use all the fully features and have something that looks amazing, just go for the high one. That's going to be similar in Godot 4. But in this case, the high-end renderer with all the features is going to be Vulkan, and the low-end renderer with less features but more performance is going to be OpenGL. That's the main difference.
Okay, I have a side question from Tucker, who is asking. I hear a lot about 3D with Vulkan for Godot 4.0. Will there be any advantage for 2D with Vulkan as well?
Yeah, the 2D render in Vulkan is going to be very, very, very fast. That's going to be really cool, I think. There's many changes already in the 2D side in Vulkan. The first one is that, for example, if you're going to do custom draw code, you know when you create your own 2D node and you call a lot of draw functions, like, for example, if you want to draw like 5,000 bullets to screen and you want them to compute them yourself, usually you're not going to use like 5,000 nodes. You're going to just draw them like if you were making a simple 2D engine. So all the custom drawing already is super, super fast in Vulkan. For example, if you're working with 2D lights, this is really fast right now in Vulkan because it does a single draw call and does all the lights together. In OpenGL ES renders in Godot 3, every light requires redrawing all the objects that are affected by the light. This in Vulkan is not the case. It's much faster. So in general, what you can expect with 2D in Vulkan is much improved performance in general, mostly. And probably some new features, but mostly performance.
Okay. An interesting question from Mark Castells. Igual. Sorry if I missay your name. I saw a discussion on GitHub about the possibility of translating GDScript to C++. Is it still being considered? Maybe for George.
Yeah, so actually Juan had the idea of using GDNative for this, like pick up a GDScript and compile it to C. But it's not what people think it is. It's more like, oh, this function need to be super fast. So this function I tag, and this function will be compiled to GDNative, and this function will be fast. And the other functions will still remain GDScript, use the current interpreter and everything. And the benefit is that, like, this function is going to be super fast, but everything else is going to still be, like, simple, so you can still debug everything. Once you convert to C, you cannot like debug anymore, use the debugger or anything. You have to use a C debugger or something like that. And it's like much harder to debug. So the idea is to just tag the particular functions that you want to be fast, that you need to be fast, and the rest still use the VM. The VM used to be faster than it is now, but the idea is to compile to C is just for small things, not for everything. Not make everything faster, something like that.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the VM, because we had discussion about eventually being able to change the VM, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I might misunderstand, but we wanted eventually to be able to plug in LLVM or the kind of libraries, or the kind of libraries. Can you say a word about that?
So the idea for now is like I'm working on the VM, and it would like you to have some performance improvements, especially for typed code. So if GDScript can tell the types of stuff, you can use like faster instructions that doesn't need like multiple dispatch or something like that. Like doesn't need to check the types at runtime because I already know what compile time. So I can just, if I have two integers and a plus operator, I can just, oh, I'm adding two integers, and that's just an instruction to add two integers. It's much faster than they'll vary. Oh, I have two variants and an operation. Check what is the operation and check what's the type, which is happening currently. So that's one thing. And another idea is from Chaim Peter, and he had an idea of using LLVM as the backend. So you still type GDScript, but then it compiles to LLVM, and that can be further compiled, but to like native code. And that's something still to be discussed. I don't know exactly how that's gonna work, if that's gonna work, but he does want to try it. And with the changes I'm actually making to the compiler, it should be actually easier to plug in a different backend, like a different VM at the end. So we may want to see like this. Sorry.
Okay. Another question for anyone from Juan Colazzelli. Is Godot editor going to have a Vim mod anytime? This is quite something. The problem is that kind of features is like Vim is a complex program. So basically, like having a Vim mod, I'm not even sure what it means.
I mean, it has been requested a lot, and I think there's two things. Maybe you want Vim movement, and okay, we can implement that. It should not be too hard to implement a way where you can move with the same keys as in Vim and like press I to be able to insert code and then no longer know how to get out of the script editor. That's definitely something we can implement. It's really easy to trap you in a tool. But implementing all the features of Vim, there's no point. Like if you want to use the full Vim power, then you should use Vim. There's with the Godot, the GDScript language server protocol, you can use Vim and have like all the features that you have in the editor of auto completion and debugging and even documentation. So I think if you're a Vim diehard, you should use that. If you
I mean, like, if you like Vim, and I do like Vim, for example, just use Vim. Don't try to mimic it. It's Vim. It's great.
Yeah, one thing I said before, but I want to repeat, is that maybe if there is a feature like this that for a very small amount of users could be very interesting, but maybe not for the majority, maybe we'll not implement it because it doesn't make so sense, because it's a lot more code that needs to be maintained, that needs to be fixed, and needs to take a maintainer, and that just takes time. So that we don't really have, because you have to understand that most Godot code is done with contributors donating their free time. But what we can do is just figure out which kind of extensions you would need for the editor or for the engine to be able to implement this, and then make a proposal or a pull request asking for this kind of extensions. So you can make a plugin that implements this functionality, and the editor gives you the extensions that you need to be able to do it. I think that's probably the best way in these kind of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
A simple way to solve the problem would be to be able to have a console directly inside the editor. That could work, and I don't think it should be really complex to implement, emulating the terminal inside the editor. So if someone would want to use Vim directly in the editor, or Emacs, or Nano, or any kind of terminal working.
Yeah. Well, then I tell you, use Linux and use a drop-down terminal like Yakuake or Quake, and then you can have your Vim on top of your Godot editor and just code at the same time.
That's another solution too. So in our top secret channel, Remy made me realize we skipped some question from the Patreon, so we're going to go back a little bit from to our list before. Especially since there is a question for Fabio. Will the profiler see any major improvement in 4.x in terms of both video and general profiling debugging?
Well, that's a broad question. There's definitely going to be some more love. There's a GSOC student right now that is doing an amazing work on allowing you to create your own custom, we call them profiler for now, but they are not, maybe the naming is not properly correct. It's more like a debugging module, when you can basically get some extra debugging information from your running game, and you can basically have an editor plugin that adds tabs and information to the debugging session, which is pretty cool. And you can also integrate you can communicate between the two, so you can create your own debugging tool. I think there will be at some point some discussion about debugging with threads, like script threads. It's probably a discussion we'll have to have together with George, I guess, for the language part. And also, don't know much about the visual part. Maybe one can say something there. One of the things I wanted to do with this new system that the GSOC student is developing, basically, is to have a remote console of some kind. So from the editor, you can probably just as a GDScript plugin that you can in the asset store that you can download, so we don't bloat the engine too much. But then you can basically execute code in the debug session, and you get the code executed in the running game and not the editor. Like you type the code in the editor and it gets executed. So you can live debug with commands, basically instructions. That's something I'd like to do for 4.x, probably 4.0.
I wanted to add that there's a visual profiler now in Godot 4. You can debug your frame, and you can see like every part of rendering, what is it doing, how much is it taking on CPU and in GPU. So that's also something new coming on Godot 4.
And another question is for yes, for Joan and George. Will there be improvements or addition to the extensibility of custom types and the editor in general? Kind of a broad question, but apparently the question would be being able to export custom types and having a better API for exporting properties. You know, having categories, that kind of thing. I think this is the question. And eventually add more panels, that kind of thing. So, any plans regarding that?
So one idea is to export custom resources. It's something that has been asked for a while. And there was one contributor who did a pull request, but it kind of fell into the limbo of feature freeze for 3.2. And we never reviewed, and now we're going to 4.0. It's kind of difficult to add a new thing in 3.2. But the idea is, yes, I need to check what's needed to actually export a custom resource, which should be simple, because most of the editor is pretty much done. You just need a few simple changes. And the other thing is that now you have inspector plugins, and that's something that's super hidden. Nobody knows how to work except the one who coded.
I'm sorry, I implemented this, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago, and never documented it. You can make a lot with the custom. I think Gilles tried to do something and went through a lot of pain because it wasn't documented at some point. But yeah, you can do inspector plugins. That needs to be better documented, pretty much.
It's not easy to use, indeed. Another question, while we're talking a little bit about GDScript, it's kind of a fun one, but it's a question from Alessandro Varisco, sorry. I copy-paste it, merge the words. So, will I be able to use emojis in GDScript?
Yes.
And actually, the answer is yes.
I guess. Yeah.
Surprisingly so.
The thing is, you can already use it on comments and strings, because the comments and strings, GDScript doesn't care what you put in there. As long as you need code, just do it. The problem is identifiers, and I'm kind of discussing what should be done about Unicode identifiers, because there is a Unicode standard for identifiers that Python uses, for instance. And it doesn't allow emojis as identifiers, for instance. So, or you could just allow anything and let the user do whatever they want. I don't know.
I mean, the reason I ask is this kind of silly question is also because, if I'm not mistaken, when you have some kind of different Unicode characters, you can also have other languages, some kind of languages that don't use English. So people who want to have variables named in their native language, they could benefit from the fact we could also have emojis in a way, because they're kind of the same, no? Am I right on this point?
Yeah, yes, exactly. But that's the question is whether or not we want Unicode as identifiers. We do want that. The question is how we want to implement that. Do we want to follow the Unicode standard, which would allow people to use Japanese or Chinese or Korean in the identifiers, or Arabic or anything, but wouldn't allow emojis, for instance? Or you could allow anything, which should be easier, but then you can have the other types of spaces inside an identifier that would be super crazy to see.
Those may be problematic because sometimes you don't see them inside the editor, and I can understand this.
Okay.
I wanted to add something. Oh, sorry. Go on.
Okay. Now, as a developer suggestion, try to name your variable in English. At some point, people, I'm Italian, but I don't write variable names in Italian. It just, at some point, someone is going to read it and they're not going to understand anything. So maybe be nice to the next people who's going to read your code and write it in English. Everyone wants his own language to be the most diffuse one, the lingua franca, but we are stick with English apparently.
Okay, I wanted to add something, by the way, that currently Unicode support in Godot is good, but it's still lacking quite a bunch of things. Like, for example, I think we have not standardized in UCS4 in the engine, because in some platforms like Windows, I think uses UCS2 as an example. So we have a work package that we are looking forward to do that includes like revamping all the Unicode support to Godot. Which will also give you much better support for, like, for example, font shaping, right to left languages, and this kind of things. Because this is something that has been requested a lot. The main problem we have with this is that this is not a very easy feature, especially because most of us are not familiar with this kind of things. I mean, as much as I would like to implement Arabic, I have no idea how it works and how to test it. So we've been looking for contributors and funding to do this work, so this can be done. So we have a work package ready for this, and we're going to be looking into the funding zone. But the idea is to have like the best Unicode possible support in game engines in Godot soon. So we'll probably tell you more about that soon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question from Wizard Troll Games. During the summer of code 2018, a dev implemented MIDI SoundFont 2 support for Godot, but it was never added into Godot and quietly dropped. That's kind of true. There's still a number of users that still want MIDI support. So
that's
what's
my
going
fault.
to happen on Taisa?
Yeah. The problem is that we have a certain problem with the. Let me explain the situation, because it has been going on with other stuff in the engine too. The main problem we had is that there's a lot of these features that are really cool, but they don't justify having them built into the engine, because there's not really many users using them. This is why we created GDNative, so you can extend the engine using native libraries like SoundFonts and different things. The problem we have with GDNative is that our GDNative maintainer at some point quit the project because of personal reasons, and we've been moving on to find somebody who can replace them. This person is George now, but George is still catching up. So the idea eventually is that we're going to move a lot of this functionality, even some functionality. The idea is to move it out. Like, for example, video playback is not a very widely used feature in the engine, so the idea is to move it to GDNative. We will still have official plugins for this, so you just download from the asset library and use it, but just doesn't come with the engine, because it's kind of a lot of libraries. It takes a lot of space that you don't really need in more games. So our idea is to move a lot of the stuff outside to GDNative, so we can, for example, like the Opus codec is something that some people request because it can be used for voice over IP as an example. But for most people, you don't need it. We are fine. You're fine with OGG. So once George takes over GDNative, one of the ideas is to make sure that this kind of things with audio can be properly exposed, so we can make sure that they are very easy to install from the asset library. We can even make something official, put it in our repositories, but it will be something you get from the asset library instead of coming from the engine. But for this, GDNative has to keep improving a bit more. But that's the plan.
Okay. Question from Bruno Carvalho. Will typed GDScript get any performance improvement compared to non-typed GDScript? At least on 4.0, I guess. And if not, is it planned for 4.1?
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I mentioned this a little back, but it's what I'm working right now, is improve the DVM. And the idea is like you have the type is specifically available during compile time. So if you use type hints and everything, the compiler can use a faster instruction for those cases. So that's what's going to happen. So yes, there will be an advantage of using types in terms of performance. That's for 4.0. Should be available from the first release.
Awesome. Okay. Great. Two questions probably for Juan. Will the behavior of from Mythical Mustard and Joseph Caragoli, they are asking if the API for move and slide is it going to be different after the physics rewrite?
Yeah, we've been discussing this. We have a long discussion about this at the latest Godot sprint back in January. What we discussed is that right now the problem is that kinematic body originally wasn't really meant to be for characters. It was mostly something so you can just move it with animation and it's going to keep the physics. If you put like a sphere or a box over a kinematic body and you move it with the animation player, it's going to keep that. That was the original plan with it, at least. So then we added stuff for characters, and then it kind of becomes something else. But it's very messy now because it just mixes many functions into one thing. So what we decided is that we're going to extend, like we're going to be able to inherit kinematic body. There's going to be a new node called character body, and that's going to have move and slide, and it's going to be like all the parameters you pass to move and slide, which are a very long list of very hacky parameters, are going to just be properties of the node. So the idea is to just going to be cleaned up and make something much easier to use than it is now, that it grew over time due to demand.
Okay. Another question from Aniket Chakraborty. Please say if there is any planning to improve the Android export.
That's a very broad question. I would say the Android export has been improved in every single release we've done over the past 2 years. So I'm not sure what more is needed. But yes, I can say that there is work in progress on supporting Android app bundles, which is kind of like the new format for distributing applications on Android. So this is coming into Godot 4 and possibly Godot 3.2.4. So not the next release, but like the one after that, probably within a month or two, we should have that added for Android. But the overall Android export workflow already has been improved a lot in Godot 3.2.2. So if you have missed that, then check out the release notes of Godot 3.2.2.
Okay, so yeah, I asked the question because I mean, I suppose there were some problems.
Yeah, it's good to ask.
But okay, it's if we have some more feedback on that and if people are happy with it, it will like receive less improvements. But if you do have problems with Android export, feel free to open issues and verify if there's not already opened issues about the problem you face. We had also, sorry, I didn't get the name. We had also a question about visual scripting. Are we going to have any improvements on that side in 4.0?
I am not very familiar. I think George can say this better because he's been working with Good Summer of Code.
Yeah, there is a student working on Visual Script. He's improving a little bit of the workflow. Like last year, we had already a project like that, where a GSOC student was working on a Visual Script, and the same thing is happening this year. It's proving even further. So Visual Script is not forgotten; it's still getting some love. But honestly, I don't know the details. But yeah, we did a report. Like we had a report of all the progress of GSOC student like very recently. So just go to the website and you check the news and you see what's new about Visual Script.
The website is godotengine.org, and if you go into the news or the devlog, I think you can have a post with all the progress report of all the GSOC, so Google Summer of Code students of this year. And you will see there are improvements on the on my side on the version control system. We have improvements on the visual scripting, and I think we have 5 or 6 projects this year.
6, yeah.
Okay. So because it's starting to be late, we're going for the last question. I've seen it several times in the feed. It was initially, I think, asked by David Cantor. I think the answer can be short or quite long. You'll tell us. is there any updated 4.0 estimated time of arrival? The famous question.
This summer.
This summer? Yeah.
Not today, but tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. We're waiting for it. So, if I'm not mistaken, the goal was to, like, eventually early 2021.
Usual first and time release.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in COVID world, we'll see. But yeah,
Yeah.
the aim, I mean, if I say something now, it's probably going to end up being wrong. But we're currently aiming for having like some alpha version, maybe by a few months, like 2-3 months, and so that we can have a release in early 2021. But you know how it goes, so it might drag on. We'll always wait for it to be ready, but it's a bit difficult because we're trying not to scope it too big because we don't want to wait too long to release Godot 4.0. But it's the big compat breaking release, so it's the opportunity to create new things that we will then support for many years. Rename stuff and like improve physics. If we don't improve physics in 4.0, then it means we need to improve physics in a compatible way with the then 4.0 API in 4.1. So it limits us a lot so we have to find the right balance between adding all the features we want to have and then releasing early. But there are a few things which will delay us anyway, like stabilizing all the rendering features and stuff. So in parallel to that, we can do other kind of work.
Yeah, in any case, it's a big release. We're going to have a lot of compatibility breaking changes. And the earlier we choose to release 4.0, it means some features won't be there or things like that. So of course, there is a balance for that. All right, so I think we're done for today. Do we want to? How often is it planned to do that, Remy?
Sorry, no, I haven't planned anything. But thank you, Gilles, for moderating. And,
no, I meant for the next session. Is it supposed to
for the
be
next
a monthly?
session, yeah, I think we're going to probably try to do that monthly, like at the end of each month. So we will we'll be interested in your feedback also on this live Q&A, so that you tell us like what you like, what you didn't like on the format. Like we're trying to make it work with the means we have currently. So like just live streaming a GT conversation. We'll see if we can improve some bits of it. But if you have suggestions both on the format or in the content, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, on IRC, or even make a Godot proposal about the live Q&A. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, well, okay, that's a good idea. Well, okay. Do you want to tell a little bit about what's going to happen to the Godotcon? If it's ever done.
Right. So we had our last like real life event that was in the ancient world in February, and we were planning to have an event in October, but of course these plans have been stopped. But now we're trying to figure out how to make like some kind of online GodotCon. So we're looking into which kind of technical option we should use for that. And once we settle on a date, we will have a call for papers. So asking everyone who wants to be a speaker to make a proposal. And then we will probably have, in a format similar to this, a live stream of a speaker and then interacting with the chat and probably maybe using Discord in parallel so that there can be like a bit longer lived chat rooms on each talk, so that people who are interested in this topic can talk there together and talk with the speaker or talk privately and everything. So we will keep you posted once we have decided how this should look like, but there will be normally an online GodotCon in coming months.
Okay. Also, I've seen a question in the chat about like asking where they can have these beautiful T-shirts we have today. Sadly, we only sell them on the event we go. As for now,
A time machine.
yeah, you need a time machine where the COVID didn't exist yet. But yeah, maybe in 2 years, in FOSDEM, something like that. And
we're actually
yes.
thinking about, we've been thinking for a very long time about setting up some kind of online store where you can buy some merchandise. We don't want to do that ourselves because, like, first of all, we are not a company, so we cannot like run a store like that. And second, we spend enough time working on Godot itself. We cannot really afford to spend time on something like that. Like all the logistics of handling payments and then shipping merchandise. But we're looking into some online options where we can just send them some designs, and then some company can print stuff, and then a very small share of the benefits would go back to the Godot project. We wouldn't be doing that for the money because we would probably not benefit a lot from it, but more for enabling anyone who wants to have some nice Godot swag to order what they want. So we're looking into that also with our partner charity, Software Freedom Conservancy, who have also some experience with that and some options they can set up for us.
Someone is suggesting to have Godot masks.
That's a very good suggestion. Yeah, I would buy one.
Okay, so we're done for today. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to all the people in the chat having nice words to the community.
Yes.
Do you guys want to add something for the last words?
I would say thanks everyone for your support. It's really amazing to be able to work, on a project like Godot with the support from the community.
For you.
So we're having a lot of fun, and we are quite proud of the product we're building together. So we hope you're also having a good time with Godot.
Okay, so let's wrap this up, and well, see you at the next episode of the live Q&A, I guess. Yeah, in a month.
Yeah, in a month.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay. Is it shut down?
Now, yes.